Hey guys, I'm Timothy Roberts, and in this video we're going to do an experiment. So this is kind of a weird cymbal, obviously. This is actually a cymbal from my stack ring percussion collection, and it goes with the Versa stack that I make, which is like the clap stack stacker kind of thing that a lot of companies make. And I had this one extra 20-inch stacker piece left over. It's a flat B20 blank. I've done very minimal processing to it. It's only had hammering from the underside, and then it's had burnishing on top. And the whole point is to get a cymbal that's really, really floppy and shaped in a little bit of a U shape. And then you just stack different diameters on top of it, and you get an 808 clap sound. So I had this one left over, and I want to do an experiment today and see if I can turn this into a pang cymbal or a swish cymbal or a China cymbal, whatever you want to call it. Basically, I'm going to get a flange at the edge, and I'm going to build it up and turn it into a low volume, rideable swish cymbal. I don't know if it's going to work. We're going to give it a shot. The reason why I don't know if it's going to work, really if I will like how it turns out. I know it'll work, but it's all dependent on the specs that it has and will it actually deliver when it's in the shape that I'm going to hammer it into. It's 20 inches. It's like under 1,600 grams, so very, very thin, and it's totally unlathed, so I'm not really going to be able to work with a taper at all. I'm going to want to keep about as much weight on this cymbal as I can, and so the whole thing is going to be get it into the shape. Hopefully I can get enough stick clarity out of it. Hopefully it'll have enough of a crash, but because it's a swish cymbal, it'll have that flange. It'll also have a pretty open sound because of the weight. Typically, China cymbals with the flange, that flange really stiffens up the overall cymbal, does not allow a lot of sustain to come off, and it really gives that super quick, aggressive sound that we all know from China cymbals. So basically, I'm looking for something that's going to be warm and mellow while still having that kind of aggressive sound that those cymbals have. The other thing I'm going to have to navigate is the center hole, because I want to hammer a bell into this, but it already has the hole. So I have to navigate hammering the underside of that bell and building up a bell that doesn't actually crack the hole or the area around the hole. So I have to leave some unhammered bronze just right around that center hole. If I hammer right on that edge, it could pretty easily split. So that's going to be difficult. The weight is going to make it super difficult. I figured, why not? Let's just do this experiment and see what it turns into. So I'll play it one more time, and then I'll show you guys how I'm going to hammer this thing, and we'll see if I can successfully complete this experiment. Alright, so the shaping is done on this weird experiment project, and I got the shape pretty low, and there's a pretty hard flange. As you can see, it flips up. Very typical of China's, swishes, pangs, whatever you call them. I don't love the sound of it, to be honest. To me, because the blank was so thin, there's not enough material up higher near the bell to not have a really hollow, gongy kind of sound that has some weird notes and tones. You probably saw in the video I was really having to hammer the cymbal a lot, and I actually had to go back and do another session of hammering after that. And essentially, you know, when you have a thicker blank, you're hammering it, there's more material to move, and so it's a lot easier to get it up into a taller shape. It's a lot easier to get it to flange if you're making a China. There's just a lot more flexibility. When it's thin like that, there's really not a lot of material to move, so it just requires a lot more work to get it into the shape that you want. And then there's also a greater risk of cracking if you take the material too far and overhammer it too much. So let's take a listen to this, and I'll tell you what I'm going to do next in the process to kind of explore where this thing could go. Then we'll just see what happens, I guess. I'm not typically a fan of these kinds of cymbals. I don't make many of them because my ear doesn't gravitate towards that sound. One of the reasons why it sounds the way that it does is it's still unlathed. I haven't removed any of the oxide crust. That'll help open up a little bit more shimmer and wash. That will definitely be helpful to the sound. And that's going to be the next step. So I want to take this thing, get rid of the oxide crust. I want it to open up more. I don't want it to be as clanky sounding. I don't want it to be as tonal and full of hums. I want it to have a smooth spread. I want to bring in less of that aggressive China-like sound, even though it is a China and it's going to sound aggressive and trashy. That's going to involve removing as little of the weight up here on the cymbal as possible, and then tapering the edge. I want to get this edge really, really thin so it can activate and send out a little bit more spread and sustain. And then I think from there I'm going to try something. I really don't know how it's going to turn out. What I'm going to do is cut the cymbal down a little bit. When you cut a cymbal down that's pre-shaped, you are disrupting the equilibrium that it's in. A number of things can happen. The whole shape can go wonky and kind of twist and be all weird, and then you have to go back and hammer it again to get the shape where you want it. Sometimes it's okay. I'm thinking that because there's such a hard line here and the flange is going up and has a good amount of distance here, I think when I cut it down it's going to stay relatively intact. But cutting it down is me going after trying to get a little bit more sustain and making the flange a little bit less present in the cymbal. So if it really just has a small upturn at the edge, we're allowing this to function more like a normal cymbal would and have sustain like a normal cymbal would. So let's give it a shot, see what happens. All right, so after a bit of lathing, it's definitely much more open. I did a taper starting around here to the edge. It's giving the cymbal a lot more life, even though the problems I have with the cymbal are still there. Let's check it out and see what we think. So to me in the room, there's a lot more sparkly, shimmery stuff on the top end. It's still, because of how thin the blank is and how relatively little weight there is from here up to the bell, it just has lots of hums and tones, just ugly stuff going on that doesn't really allow you to get a clear stick. Really what I would ideally have, instead of starting with a super thin blank, is start with a much heavier blank and then shape it, and then when I lathe it, I keep a good amount of weight here, lay the good taper to the edge, you know, get it to where it's this thin at the edge, but there'd be more weight up here. You'd have a ton more stick definition and clarity when riding it, and it would still give you that typical swish, China, pang kind of thing. So at this point, what I'm going to do is go in and I'm going to cut down the diameter. This is going to take away some of the flange. It's going to make it less aggressive, less China-like, less trashy, and hopefully we can get it to where it starts functioning a little bit more like the kind of cymbal that I would like it to, which is one that has more clarity, less of these hums and tones that are popping out really, really far. So I'll cut this down, and then I might have to do a little bit of hammering to reshape it if it kind of goes out of whack. From there, we'll really be at the end of the experiment, and we'll see if I was able to pull anything good out of this. Either way, I had fun doing it, and looking forward to hearing what it sounds like after the cut down. All right, here it is. I took it down 1 inch, which now makes it an 18-inch. It's got a much smaller flange at the edge. It doesn't really start heading up near as much, so it kind of is flat and barely starts rising before it hits the end of the cymbal. And this has drastically affected the sustain that it has. I took it off the lathe yesterday and I hit it and I was like, whoa, I didn't expect that much to come back into the cymbal. And it's a really great illustration of how changes in the metal's trajectory, how that affects the sustain of the cymbal. So one example is the bell of your cymbal and as it transitions into the body of your cymbal. If you have a bell that kind of comes down and then there's this kind of hard curve and it goes into the body sort of in a sharper way, that bell is going to be pretty separated. The sustain hits that sharp curve, that sharp transition, and the sustain just dies. So if you have a bell, if your bell on your ride is like a pressed bell and you hit it and it just feels super piercing and clear, it's because that hard edge is making it to where that sustain can't continue through the body of the cymbal. If your bell is gradual and slopes into the body of your cymbal, you hit the bell and then the whole cymbal activates. So it's allowing the sustain is just flowing right through that transition. With a China cymbal or a Pang cymbal or a swish, whatever you want to call it, that upturn at the edge is acting like a roadblock for the sustain. So you hit it, it's going up and down the cymbal. As it comes to the edge of the cymbal, it hits that upturn and it just dies, and then it doesn't allow the sustain to continue off the edge of the cymbal. What's left is really that China-like, trashy, aggressive sound. So when I took this diameter down a little bit and made that flange less extreme, it invited in more sustain. It wasn't quite hitting a wall so hard. It was really allowed to continue off the edge of the cymbal, which is making it kind of sound a little bit like a crash. Now, the one thing I really don't like about it now is that I have this very clear note that I'm hearing, this note that's underneath it wherever I play it. So I don't know if it's translating over the mic, but it's very annoying to my ear. So if I was going to finish this cymbal as is, I would go in and do some more hammering to address that. There's a need to notch that hum, kind of bury it, get it a part of the overall overtones of the cymbal so that it doesn't stick out like a sore thumb. Because if you're trying to ride on that or even crash on it, that note is going to be abrasive and weird, especially if you're playing with other musicians. It can clash pretty easily. So all in all, I thought this was a pretty fun experiment. Started out with a clap stack piece, versus stack piece. I was able to turn it into something that could be musical in a certain scenario. But I would really like to know what you guys think. So drop a comment below, subscribe, and hit the bell if you want notifications. And keep an eye out for the next video. I'm Timothy Roberts. Thanks for watching.